Hi, my name is Andrea McKennen. I grew up in Reno, Nevada. The desert will always be very important to me. I went to college in Southern California and then headed out to Boston to do work in the environmental policy field. That led me to being interested in landscape architecture. So I studied landscape architecture. That's why I moved here, to study landscape architecture. And well, I realized that I will always love landscape architecture. I realized there are steps in the process of making a beautiful landscape that are not interesting to me. And so I departed from that and headed off in the direction of graphic design. Graphic design is a big part of landscape architecture and conveying ideas of what a site might look like, and I love that. And so I worked as a freelance graphic designer for a number of years, which I thought was my dream job. And for a while it was great, but then I realized I was working really hard and I didn't like that I constantly needed to be selling myself and hustling and, getting new clients. And I was in my pajamas way too much of the time, just working at home. And I realized that I wanted to have a mission that I woke up to be working towards every day. So I started looking for somewhere that I could be a designer but be working for an organization that felt true to my beliefs. And I landed with St. Paul Public Library in their communications department. And I worked as a graphic designer there, then started taking on more and more roles. And after being there for a number of years, I hopped over to the role I'm in now, which is more library administration. I work for an organization called the Metropolitan Library Service Agency, or MELSA. And we're an umbrella organization that guides and supports the public libraries in the Twin Cities metro area, and I manage projects for them. And that's my story.
Let me just follow up on a
Yeah.
couple things. Let's take this back to the desert.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the desert a little bit?
I love the I just love the desert. When I see the desert, I feel like that's me. I get back to the desert regularly. Artwork that evokes the desert speaks to me. This month I'm headed out. One of my dear friends from childhood is an artist, and her work really evokes the desert, and she has a grant to do some film work. It's a grant for established artists who want to explore film, and so we're going up. I get to go with her, and we're going to go document the desert. I also take photographs, and so we'll be out in the desert, and we don't have a plan other than that we're meeting at the Las Vegas airport and driving. Yeah, it's a special place to me, and I'll always feel like that's home for me.
Yeah. Now, as I heard your story, it felt like you moved from this experience of a powerful landscape to designing landscapes to explaining design landscapes to explaining other things to administering.
Right.
Do you feel like you've moved a long way? I mean, a long distance from that initial intuition, or is it still there in what you do?
I feel like that initial, connection to the land. I feel like it comes up in just a connection to nature, and people are part of nature, and so I think part of what I bring to my work, that a skill I have, is just connecting with people. And so I think it's still there, and just my love of connection and of having positive relationships with the people around me, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I think my journey, it's been circuitous, and it will probably continue to be.
Well, I'm just struck. I mean, the desert has always been the place where people go to be alone.
Right.
And then you say, well, I was working way too much in my pajamas. It's like, there seems to be a pole here between a love of a very bleak, personal, kind of spare landscape and the social butterfly mode of meetings and such.
That's interesting. Yeah, I guess I don't know how to explain that. The desert to me is an aesthetic place, but I don't think of it as necessarily being solitary. It's more the aesthetic sense of it that draws me in.
I see. Well, thank you. Let's
Yeah.
take a... Please.
Hi, My name is Zach Miller. How did I come to be where I am? Well, I was born in North Platte, Nebraska, at Great Plains Regional Medical Center. And when I was a little kid, I moved from North Platte to Glenwood, Iowa. And shortly thereafter, I had a very, very special teacher named Mavis Euling. And she taught me year-round, every year from 2nd grade until 8th grade. And we had, her students and I had an amazing opportunity to delve into these super long, like year-long research projects. And the very first one that I did was about whales. And after that project was done, I was like, boom, marine biologist, that's my calling. Well, then the next year I did one on Albert Einstein, and I was like, boom, physicist, that's my calling. And that one I actually stuck with. And my parents really nurtured my interest in physics, and I read all the books before I could come anywhere close to understanding them. All I understood was algebra, and I'd be staring at these, differential equations, trying to make sense of them with my algebraic abilities and nothing more. But I would still slog through all these books, and that's what I wanted to do, and I knew it. So I held on to that passion all the way through high school, and it came time to go to college, and I really wanted to go either to the East Coast or the West Coast. Actually, where Andrea went was kind of like part of the Claremont colleges were really, sort of a dream of mine. But my mom said, please stay within a day's drive of home. And so I drew a radius of circle 12 hours around the little town where I lived near Omaha. And within that radius, there was a cluster of schools in Minnesota. I had never really thought of Minnesota before as a place that I wanted to go, let alone a place that I would want to concentrate my time only in the winter months and then have the summers off. I had this fear of big cities because I had grown up in parts of the country where if there was a big box retailer, like Shopko, for example, that kind of meant the big city for me. And so Omaha or Lincoln, intimidating. And any cities greater than that size, not even thinking about it. So I said, I will only go to college in a city of 50,000 or fewer people. So that limited my scope even further. And I took a tour of 8 different colleges with my mom, and one of them was St. Olaf College. And I just completely fell in love with the campus, and I ended up going there. So I showed up, and much to my dismay, I found that they do not offer the Bachelor of Science degree at St. Olaf. You must get a Bachelor of Arts. And that brings all these general education requirements like the history of Western civilization and multicultural studies and foreign language and everything else. And I was very upset that I wasn't just going to be able to take physics and math. But it ended up being the greatest blessing to my life that I was required to branch out. Because my junior year, I studied abroad, and I went on they call it the global semester. And we went to 9 different countries. We went to Israel, the West Bank, India, China, Egypt, and we were actually in Israel when the Second Intifada started. And then we were in Cairo shortly thereafter when there was all this unrest happening. And I had moved mountains in order to maintain my physics major and still be away for a semester and an interim. But when I came back, I was no longer so enamored with physics. I thought, I need to solve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I can't spend my life in a laboratory. There's human beings living on this earth, not just elementary particles. So I went to graduate school in Washington, D.C. at the Elliott School of International Affairs. And I got my master's in focusing basically in U.S. foreign policy. And while I was there, I refused to take unpaid internships and stuff like that. And I had a friend that was working at the Environmental Protection Agency in the Office of Water. Yes, that actually exists. They have something just called as it's just that basically named the Office of Water. And so I was like 25 years old, and they were like, "That guy's young. Make him do the communications. He understands the internet." So I kind of fell into communications while I was in graduate school. And then I bounced around agencies a little bit. I got into this thing called the Presidential Management Fellows Program. And I worked in the Office of Citizen Services and Innovative Technologies. And from there, I went to the National Science Foundation. It was a place to merge my interest in public policy and science. And I was there for a while, and sort of like what felt like my dream job at the time. And my wife, who also I met on the global semester through St. Olaf, she said, "Time to move back to the upper Midwest and start a family." And she had a chance to transfer with her. She's a federal attorney. Her agency has a local office. And so we transferred here. And I was looking for jobs, and I thought, foreign policy isn't going to get me very far in the Twin Cities. But I've been doing this thing called communications or public affairs in the federal government. And I thought, I really don't want to shill for Target or Best Buy or something like that. I thought, what can I do that I really believe in? It might not be incredibly lucrative, but I want it to be something that sort of satisfies my soul. And so I started looking at University of Minnesota jobs. And I saw this Minitex thing. Minitex is a division of the University of Minnesota Libraries, and the vision of which is flourishing libraries in informed communities. So, supporting libraries of all kinds all throughout the state, getting information to the people of Minnesota, and I thought that sounds wonderful. So, I applied, and here I am.
Wow. I got to go back to the beginning with you too. I'm tempted to spend the rest of the thing asking about whales, but
and I would respond with a 7-year-old's depth of knowledge.
Yeah, well, that I expect that would beat out a lot of people, including pretty much everybody at the upper end of the federal government right now. Unfortunately for the whales, but. What blessed educational system got anybody into a situation to keep people on year-long projects and to hold on to the same crew of kids for, 6 years?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd like to know, the public policy origins of this program that I was in. But I remember being in kindergarten and being taken by Miss Euling into it's one of my earliest really bright, vivid school memories, into the theater. And we sat in the theater seats, and she gave me some kind of a test. And I don't really know what that test was, other than the fact that it ended up putting me into this class. And for the first 2 years, I was the only one in the class, along with some kids that were older than me. But yeah, I don't know how it got started in a little town, or who supported it, or if she was just going rogue and they let her keep doing it for years and years and years. Really? But it was a great opportunity.
Wow.
Just for the heck of it, could we put the name of the town and the name of the school on the record?
Yeah, sure. It was Glenwood, Iowa, and it was West Elementary School.
I think of Jane Elliott, who was doing these incredible things also, I believe, in Iowa, about that time in a very tiny place. Okay, so we start with whales, then we get to physics. We get stuck on physics for a really long time until we go abroad, and then that goes away in favor of some very high prestige stuff, things that could have landed you in the Senate, for crying out loud. And that goes on for a while until your spouse says we need to move back to the Midwest, and then you end up with Minitex. And this is just the kind of story I hear every time I do these things, oddly enough, you know. I flunked out of pharmacy school, and the only thing usually, there's no flunking out in your story, but it's basically, the only thing I knew how to do was program a computer. And the only people who needed that right now were the electronic music people in Princeton. This is the story about how the premier electronic music person in the country, in his own area, got started, you know. So you get these things, and it just indicates. But it seems really important. I mean, you had two huge jolts of the liberal arts. I mean, of a broad culture. That early stuff, and then St. Olaf. Now, when I hear, I'll be honest with you, when I hear somebody telling me that he manages the interlibrary loan program for a very large university.
I don't do that. I just attempt to talk about it.
I
Very
see.
fine folks at Minitex actually manage
Yeah,
it.
well, okay. I mean, there are distinctions here, but I mean, the sort of person who I can imagine doing interlibrary loan is like the little Nomi figures at Hogwarts, you know. You know the ones I mean, right?
I'm glad that you brought those people up, because when you were talking about like my journey and the different backgrounds that people have that you talk to, you will find darn near every person at Minitex has a background like that. And you start a conversation and it's like, my God, this is where all of the interesting people have been hiding out in the world. Like, I've worked in some fantastic places and I've loved my coworkers, my colleagues. But more than any other place, I would say the library community. Wow.
Right.
Some fascinating people. Musicians.
But I want to probe that because I've run into two other professions that are like that. One is the university janitorial service. You'll run into, you know, I mean, sometimes the guy who opens the door for you has a PhD in the department and just couldn't get a job, and these are really good benefits. And the other is the museum guards at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. They're generally painters, you know, a lot of painters in their own right, and this is and I once had a very gifted student who was trying to decide whether to be something like a museum guard or to go into the academy, and there's no question you'll have more time to read as a museum guard than you'll ever have in the academy. So I guess my question is, how does it work in terms of getting, you know, I mean, you understand what the janitorial folks are up to. They want a job that doesn't take their juice. Because they have plenty of stuff they want to do at 5:01 p.m. And the museum guard is a little different because you're around the paintings, you know, and so you get some inspiration. You get to talk to people. Basically, life begins at 5:01. I had a writer friend or acquaintance who worked in a hat factory, and life began at 5:01. To what extent does your life begin at 5:01?
That's phrased so well. I would say that my life doesn't start at 5:01 because I'm sort of obsessed with the fact that our workplaces are, you know, for better sometimes and sometimes for worse. And the people that we work with are as important as our families, because you spend, 8 of your waking hours every day with these people. And as much as I totally understand the perspective of those museum guards and the people that you were talking about, I mean, they're working amongst art. So there's some good stuff happening before 5:01 for them as well. But I want to work with people who engage me and make me feel fulfilled and do things together with them that I think are worthwhile. And I do have the chance to do that. So, I mean, for my part, I want to have the chance to to live before 501 as well.
Right. Now, at this point, could I ask you to push your chairs together so we can actually make this a conversation with two people?
Are we good?
Yeah. I'm going to run it as tight as possible because of our light issue, but yeah, we're fine. Okay. Well, same question to you. How much of your how do you how is it for you in terms of the sort of the 501 problem?
I like Zach. I feel like I need to fill it in. I need to do some more before 501 while I relate to the stories of the janitors and the art, the guards. So yeah, for me, I like to feel like I'm spending the hours before 501 contributing to my community, helping nurture other people in their work. But then at 501, I'd shift gears, and there are other things that I'm passionate about and that I work on. My dad was in the Vietnam War, and I'm interviewing him about that. And writing about that, and I have 2 kids who I love spending time with, and my husband, so it keeps going. It's an all-day thing, but just shifting focus at 501.
Well, now I have the $24,000 question for each of you, which is, what is it that you're doing now that engages you, that makes it feel like you're alive? In the period between 8:45 and 5:15, I imagine you don't just run it quite an 8-hour day. Although you also don't keep a cot in your office.
Yeah.
You get people who keep a cot in their office, and you get people who come 15 minutes late and leave 15 minutes early. And my guess is you're probably a half hour to the good.
Well, thank you for that kind assumption.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, your employers are watching, of course, so we want to kind of keep it in that frame. But tell me what's engaging you in the work you're doing now.
I'm excited about. I lead teams that take on a variety of projects affecting the 100 libraries that I work with. And I love when I can get a team working together on something and have a team that's excited about something. I like learning about team dynamics and helping shape team dynamics in a positive way. That is very exciting. I'm working with a group that is focusing on world language acquisitions in our libraries. So often there's just one person with that job for a whole library system, or maybe if that library is big enough, a few, 2 or 3. That's a big job given the number of languages spoken in our communities. So pulling people together from our systems to work together on that, it's really exciting to me. I think they're learning from each other, and getting a bigger number of people working on that is helping improve the work. And then this self-publishing platform that we have up and running in the state is exciting to see. Libraries engaging with self-published authors. That self-publishing is booming, and libraries need to be playing a role somehow. And so we're taking a step in that direction, and that's exciting to me too.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, I think the stuff that I enjoy the most is the stuff that kind of fills in gaps and kind of empowers people everywhere, regardless of their background or the town they live in or the neighborhood they live in or what their parents do for a living or what they do for a living. And a couple of the projects that sort of fit that definition for me are eBooks Minnesota. That's an online ebook collection that Minitex has put together. Features tons of Minnesota small publishers, where there's about 5,000 books in there right now, and it's growing every day. Starting out just a little bit small, but if you want to check out a book, you don't actually have to check it out. You can go there. If every person in Minnesota could read the same book in eBooks Minnesota at the same time, and that wouldn't be a problem. So you don't have to check it out. You don't have to return it. There's no limit to the number of people that can read a book. And there's tons of stuff in there for kids. There's kids' books in Spanish, and there's books in Somali. There's books in Ojibwe now. And everybody in the state has access to this collection, and it's unlimited. So that's really cool. And then Andrea addressed this really cool project built around self-publishing that got started early in 2017, probably in late 2016. Minitex, our director, Valerie Horton, she comes up with lots of wonderful ideas to address the kind of gaps that I was just talking about and work with public libraries and other library systems. And we ended up working with this organization called Pressbooks that provides a platform for people to put together really professional grade, top quality books. And you can publish it to the web, or you can download it in any of the formats that are needed for the publishing industry. And so instead of having people kind of have to do it on their own, you can go into our statewide instance of Pressbooks and put together a super professional, top grade book. And Melsa worked with us and helped to fund the statewide instance of Pressbooks, and out of that has grown stuff that I think at the time was a little bit unpredictable. So it started out with that, and we called it the Minnesota Libraries Publishing Project. And then Melsa kicked off Min Writes, Min Reads, which is so cool, which actually Andrea can...
Yeah, which uses the Pressbooks tool that Zach was talking about. You said this, but it's a tool that an author can use, and they take, your Word document or your manuscript, and it produces this beautiful, polished-looking piece that just kind of elevates it, from looking homemade to looking like a beautiful
like it
final
came from
product. Right. And then adding to that tool, we've purchased and created a platform then where authors can share their work. And that, combined with that tool, is Min Writes, Min Reads. We're hosting an author contest right now to beef up that collection and to recognize some great authors, and we're getting a lot of submissions. We're excited about that. And like I said, this is our foray into how can libraries support self-published authors. We need to be engaged. And for the most part, we haven't had a mechanism to do that until now.
Right. This is unbelievably exciting, what you're talking about. We almost have to, take a run at it. It's so exciting. But I'm just amused by the fact that there's a fight going on the card on which this is recorded. Because the guy who was on it just before you, who is a perfect candidate for all this, he's got all sorts of unpublished first-rate stuff that he needs to get out, and I put you in touch. But he also is the author of several books of the general title "Why Teams Don't Work." And I think made what fortune he made from those books, because teams were a big deal corporately, right. And then people began to find the problems, and his books are the sort of the downside books on some. I have no idea what the books are. I haven't read them, but since you mentioned teams, can you give me gospel testimony that teams do work? Or is it more nuanced than that, as they say in the business?
Well, that's a great question. My first thought is that, if you want to achieve, you can only, what you do by yourself, it's going to be limited because it's just you. And so it depends on what your goal is, right? So if it's me interviewing my dad about his experiences, I feel like that's something I want to take on my own. I feel like I can do on my own better. But if I want to do something that's going to impact the writing community in Minnesota, I'm going to do better if I'm working with people, because I'll have a broader reach. So that's my thought. And then I think ideas, if you have a good, and bad teams, I agree, I'd rather work alone, but if you can develop a camaraderie in a good team, I think you can just go a lot farther.
Let me just one follow-up there. Because go back 25 years, the first thing I did was about a university team to talk about aesthetic issues. And how long does it take for a team to gel?
Oh, that's a good question.
Oh, yeah. It's storming, norming, and performing. Have you ever heard that management speak?
No, I haven't.
You bring everybody together. team members are uncertain of their role, but they're putting effort into it, energy into the system. So you're storming. Everybody's trying to find their role. Then, gradually, you find that you're norming. People are beginning to find their role. They're putting their energy in the right direction. And then, more time passes and you realize, by God, we're performing. It's like reverse entropy. How long does it take? I don't know.
Well, yeah, I was just wondering, do you pass it on to your son or grandson, daughter or granddaughter to get them to bear the fruit? You know, some sow and the others reap. It's out of the scriptures, right?
Storming, norming, and performing.
That's right.
All right, interesting. I'll remember that.
Yeah. It's a good theory, but mostly it just rhymes.
I recently heard Zach's boss, Valerie Horton, speaking about teams, and she said something that just stuck with me, and I believe it's true, and that's that Google did a study, and it indicated that teams that perform best are teams, and Google wanted to know this question. You know, they're like, why do some of our teams do so well, and some flounder? And they had all the, they thought, oh, it must be budget, it must be clearly defined parameters, it must be a strong leader. And all those hypotheses were proven to be untrue. And what it ended up being was teams where people are kind to each other perform the best. Mm-hmm. And so I think taking the time to be kind and to get to know each other and to make sure everybody feels heard and not diving in like, we need to, accomplish, and just taking time to really establish that dynamic is key.
Yeah, that's my experience. Mm-hmm. Too. Yeah.
Can I say one more thing about teams?
Yeah.
I had this quotation up on my wall before we moved from Anderson Library to Wilson Library, and it's been lost. But Linus Pauling, who I think he won 2 Nobel Prizes in chemistry, which is impressive, he said, the only way to have a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. And, one person can come up with a lot of ideas, but 5 people can come up with even more ideas. Mm-hmm. 5 times as many ideas, you might say. So.
And if you don't have too much ownership over those ideas, if they're just the group's ideas and it doesn't get personal in the sharing of those ideas, I think you can go a lot farther.
A good brainstorm where everybody is just like totally willing to, be vulnerable is one of my favorite things to experience in the work setting. It doesn't happen very often.
Right, it's hard to find that magical moment.
It is.
And part of being vulnerable, I think, is the willingness to ask questions, like, not only sharing your own ideas, but it's hard to say, like, so why do we do it this way? And, I think just questioning the status quo is actually being vulnerable.
Yeah. Well, let's move on a little bit to these particular things. This self-publishing possibility must take an enormous amount. I mean, in my imagination, it takes an enormous amount of investment in anybody you're moving from a Word document to this pretty thing. Mm-hmm. First of all, am I right that you're investing substantially in anybody that you take on?
I think that we are investing in substantial resources. There's no doubt about that. Mm-hmm. But there's also a tremendous economy of scale at work here. Right. So if an individual writer was to try and piece by piece put everything together from creating the book and getting it into the proper format to designing it visually to make it look professional, and then trying to find readers and a place to actually host their book. I mean, trying to do that as an individual, just cobbling it together, would take an enormous amount of effort. And MELSA and Minitex and the Minnesota Library Foundation and Library Journal and the Minnesota's regional library systems, putting this system together, it takes a lot of resources, but when you look at the benefit to each person who participates, the economy of scale is really powerfully at work.
Right, and just this repeating what Zach said. In other words, is that once this is up and going, it's not as much that we're working individually with each author. We've tried to set it up so that this is now that we have provided these tools that it's easy for people to work through it independently. So we're just hoping more and more people learn about these tools and find them useful.
Mm-hmm. Right. The biggest investment, I would say, in the near term will be probably the judges in the Minnesota Author Project who have some books to read.
Right.
Right. Now, it's not really a question from this card. It's a question from the card about two back. Steve Atkinson just published a 2-volume history of his time in Vietnam. And from what I can tell from the interview and from the way he proceeded, it's going to be a very valuable resource for people in Minnesota thinking about, their engagement with that war. But he was going through my understanding was that he was going through a commercial enterprise to do more or less what you're doing in a different mode. And I'm wondering how you understand the relationship between what the library does and commercial enterprises that are doing very much the same thing and have for a really long time.
Right, right.
My cousin, a cousin of mine who is possibly the worst poet who could ever live. I mean, it's worse than actually lived. It's possible worlds. He manages to hit all of the bad. His poems are bad in ways that normally don't go together. They exclude each other. Well, I mean, he found some outfit in Chicago to publish him, and that says a lot about Chicago.
Yeah.
So tell me about, how you understand your relationship to the fact that there are a range of established self-publishing industries out there.
Well, I'd say there's pieces to it. So our platform consists of this tool for authors to take their book and get it looking really beautiful. So that in some ways is separate from the whole piece. So some of our authors will use just that, and then they won't choose to share their titles through our platform. And we're glad to be assisting them with just that if that's what they decide is right for them. And so in some ways we're helping out. We're just glad to be helping out authors. So instead of them shelling out hundreds of dollars to a company to give them that polished look, we're glad that we can do that for free, and then they can go distribute how they see fit. And then there's the sharing component where authors can go and share their titles, and that might feel right for some authors, it might not. If it does, we're really glad to be making that connection to the community. But I think that can go hand in hand with other mechanisms of self-publishing. Anything to add to that?
I kind of liken it to the music scene. There are huge record labels that put out Beyonce and Led Zeppelin back in the day, and Beyonce and Led Zeppelin, yes, I'll say it, although I catch some flack for it, Led Zeppelin is great. The stuff that comes from the big boys is wonderful. There's a lot of quality there, but if you ignored the smaller bands that don't get that giant contract, holy cow, you'd be missing out on so much. And when you think about the community, like in the 80s, where a punk band from LA or DC could go to just about any city because they knew that they could couch surf, and they would have a place to lay their head and get a sandwich, and then they'd play that town and they could make it, and they could put their art out there into the world. And I see what libraries are doing as kind of like, enabling that infrastructure, if you will, for the little guy out there who might just be as much of a genius as the guy who's being published by Knopf. And now her voice can be available to readers as well. So because I love those little tiny bands, and I know there's going to be some little tiny books that their quality isn't so tiny. It's just as good as the big stuff, and that's how I see we need every part of the ecosystem. We shouldn't get rid of the giant publishers, but we definitely don't want to ignore all the creative people out there.
Yeah, the Bat of Minerva is certainly in a niche like that. It's a farm team niche, the Bull Durham niche. I'm very important. Now, I've got to quote my cousin, just to give you an idea.
Your poet cousin?
The cousin with the poet, because I have one very famous poet cousin, and then there's this guy. It's about berry picking, blueberries. We would hurry to the harvest of that azure-colored fruit, ere they would be mostly eaten by bears who were astute. I've analyzed that at great length. It manages to cross all kinds. So my cousin, coming to your tool, could make, click appropriate numbers of clicks and make that look pretty.
Yes.
Yep, a very minimal number of clicks, frankly.
Yeah. And once the clicks had been clicked and the thing looked pretty, he could, send it to the website to keep company with the next F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Yes.
Or Marianne Moore, depending. One of the difficulties is not clear whether he should go with F. Scott Fitzgerald or Marianne Moore, which is sort of a side. Anyhow.
Well, I think that stanza was, very worthy of being heard.
I see. Yes. Well, I've been keeping it alive for 20 years. He knew a lot about aphids, this guy. Now, you mentioned a contest or something,
right.
The thing you have readers for. So what's more with this thing you have readers for than what my cousin could do with his clicks?
Mm-hmm.
So there's two things. I'll jump on.
Yeah.
So your cousin sends his book of poetry there. It's in the state collection, and he can share it with you, share it with his neighbors, and folks can find that. And we're glad for that. And then there are two ways that we're kind of calling out some of the highlight titles right now. And right now it's only for fiction and young adult titles. But folks from Library Journal, this is a nationwide trade publication for libraries, are reviewing those titles, and they're choosing the ones that they deem the best of the best. And those are put in a special curated collection. So if you're on that platform reading, you might choose, maybe you don't want to get everybody's poetry, maybe you just want the best of the best, and so you can browse that way. And then the contest is another way of calling out some of the highlight titles.
Mm-hmm.
You give away prizes?
Yes.
Believe it or not,
yes.
we do.
$1,000 for the winner, the fiction winner and the young adult winner.
Yep.
A write-up in Library Journal, and then some other smaller incentives like being featured in libraries and a recognition event at a conference.
Yep. A really big conference.
The Minnesota Library Association conference.
ALA Midwinter,
That too.
I believe.
That too. Yeah, I forgot about that one.
In Seattle.
Right.
Now there's a word that I've been kind of wondering if I would hear in this conversation that I haven't heard yet. And just having come off of watching 3 seasons of Newsroom, which I take to be the summit of television production in the 21st century so far, the word editor is strangely missing. And whenever I talk to an author, and especially people who have a lot going for them, you can just barely see their marriage from their relationship to their editor. It's that tight and that important, and you don't got any of those guys.
That's not something we've worked on yet.
No.
What is that? What about that yet? I mean, does that mean you're thinking about it? Somebody's thinking about it. It might happen.
It is not I wouldn't say it's something we're actively thinking about yet. But it's not. I mean, in my mind, it's not something that I've closed any doors on. There is in that Pressbooks tool we've talked a lot about where they make it look pretty. There is a feature where multiple people can contribute, and I know a number of users will be in there putting their book together and have an editor in there as well. working with them. So the tool is really conducive to using an editor, but it's not a service that we're helping provide.
Yeah, and the way that I look at it is like going back to the music analogy, intermediaries between the creator and his creation and his or her public that hopefully will consume her art. Do you need the intermediaries? I mean, if your risk is high and you have to make money, then I think you need editors. By God, you've got to make sure nothing's wrong. But if your risk is low, you can fly like Icarus and see whether your wings melt or not. And that's how I see what we're doing. Everybody is enabled to publish their book on their own using these tools, and they don't need to worry about what an editor thinks or what a publisher thinks. And that's going to enable, I think, more creativity and some absolute gems.
Yeah. Though I have to, at this point, quote Flannery O'Connor saying, they're always saying college writing teachers, destroy and disempower authors, and damn good thing, too. They should do more. Now, I got a genius living next door to me. Actually true. He's 12 cards back in the interviews. And he's got a memoir, which I think might be big and might not, and I'm not smart enough to tell. But it ain't baby stuff. Yeah. If it's bad in a sophisticated way that I can't sort out. Because, I'm not Flannery O'Connor. And I couldn't have sorted out Flannery O'Connor. Now, here's a question. I mean, this is a question he's going to ask me about you, so you can tell me, and I'll tell him. He'd really like to get this published. And he's 80 years old, and he's doing a lot of the right things, sending it off to agents and taking it through the hoops. Now, is that a separate track from going your way, or is it something that going your way would help with? In other words, if he's really serious about publication, should he ignore all this library stuff and, seek an agent and keep sending out, 10 pages and all the stuff he's doing? Or should he consider getting engaged with you for some reason or other?
I think he should absolutely consider getting engaged with the projects that we're talking about, because it could only be for the good.
Right, getting his name out there, getting a readership. And a lot, I think, my understanding is that a lot of people using these tools are also getting their books out there in other avenues, selling them in other avenues. And the one place where our system might be incompatible with other options is if you're with a big name publisher, they'll probably say, no, you can't have your book on MinReads, and at which point we can take it down. But I think it makes sense to have a title up there now.
And it's not like a giant lift to put it in there.
Right.
I mean, you upload it, and for the Minnesota Author Project, that is.
So you're holding on to your copyright and your options.
Yep, it all stays with the author.
I see. So if I stick it up on your site, I'm not telling the world that I've given up on Harcourt Brace and Jovanovic or anything like that. I've just said I'm the age I am.
Step closer.
Yeah.
Right.
In case I don't manage to do it that way, at least it'll get done this way or some such line.
Yeah. You call them up and you say, are you interested in my album? We just won the Battle of the Bands. They're like, you did? Well, I am.
But now I want to get back to, your heart and the project and how that all goes together, because I'm hearing now about a machine, essentially a publishing machine, and then a getting it out there machine that you put, and a lot of clicks, and I don't find you people anywhere in that, except maybe babysitting the machine and making sure it doesn't insert dirty words every other word or whatever it could do if you didn't babysit it. Yeah. So where are you in this process, and how does this whole business keep you guys engaged?
Oh, we want people to find out about it.
Right.
So-
we put the word out there and try and set it up so as many people as possible find out about this opportunity and sort of get out of the way, and
Right.
let them submit content if they so choose.
And seeing a need in our community and filling that is really satisfying to me. We often have folks coming in our library saying, "Hey, you're my local library. I self-published. How do I get my book in your collection?" And our libraries really would be like, we didn't have a mechanism. And so filling that need is satisfying. And then the teamwork that's gone, like it's been great working with Zach and other folks at Minitex. That all feels really satisfying to me.
Mm-hmm. And one day at 5:01, I went in there and I started to upload a paper that I wrote about China's accession to the World Trade Organization and the role of Zhu Rongji in that process. So
Did you really?
we can use our tools as well. Yeah, I did.
That's great. That's awesome.
Yeah, let's talk about China in another interview. Although I'm really interested actually in that. This ebook thing, which is the other donkey you're riding. Jesus entered Jerusalem on 2 donkeys, according to Matthew. This
Sounds
other
like a stunt riding kind of a situation.
yeah, right. Well, that's one
One
of
foot
the
on each donkey.
yeah. No biblical author has ever artist has ever attempted to represent it for some reason.
It would take a stunt.
yeah.
Stunt double.
But here's the question: this ebook thing. I mean, my understanding is Google, did every book in sight. Right. I mean,
They're still working at it.
yeah, they digitized everything, and so when I put some weird phrase into Google search, I sometimes end up with a book which will let me read for like 6 pages before it blocks something out. And sometimes if it's like 19th century, it'll let me read the whole thing.
Yeah.
So how is this different from that?
Well, our project focuses on Minnesota, so it's a little more.
For starters, that's a
more
good.
of a parameter.
Yeah.
For starters. I think it's more personal. It's more I chose to put this here, and I can give it to my neighbors.
It's less of a vacuum and more of a shelf where people can choose to place their book.
So would places like, say, Grey Wolf Press or Coffee House Press or some of these places that have done little stuff for years and years and years, would they like put their back, the stuff that's coming out of copyright, would they stick them on this shelf?
We haven't had that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we would love them to, probably. That would be something that would be a good fit, probably, for eBooks Minnesota.
Yeah,
That's true.
But there's a collection development group that is working on that.
So for
now.
eBooks Minnesota, where are you getting your stuff from at the present?
Well, we've gotten stuff from University of Minnesota Press, from Abdo, from Lerner, from Coffee House. Oh goodness. Was it Milkweed in there? I'm blanking on a couple of the publishers, but mostly the Minnesota publishing community is incredible. And so we've got like 10 or 12 small Minnesota publishers that we worked with to put some of their materials in.
What's the press? You just got a bunch of Ojibwe titles. And what's that press?
That's right. Yeah, one of the presses was Indigenous Press out of Wisconsin, and then another press that I believe is not in operation anymore, but published these beautiful little books, was called Wigwas.
Yeah. Let's see. So are you, is it part of your job, or whose job is it to go talk to people in the press and kind of lure them to stick stuff onto this shelf?
Everybody kind of pitches in a little bit, I think. We're always meeting with different parts of the library community, different parts of the literary community, and conversations happen. And, sometimes we see a need and we try to address it, but sometimes we just see an opportunity and we try to take it. So.
Now, how does it work? I mean, I'm thinking about the stuff I would kill to have on your shelf. I mean, as a teacher, would have killed to have on your shelf because I ended up buying, class sets of things in order to be able to continue to teach something that I knew would go out of print at some point. So how does it work with the? You have an author and they've died and their estate is still wanting to somewhat, to profit from, residual sales of this stuff, but it's in the nature of things, it's kind of winding down. How does your operation relate to that? Is it stuff that's kind of gone out of copyright, nobody's making any money off it, let's stick it on the shelf so it doesn't disappear entirely, or do you still have things that are also showing up in bookstores and making money? How does that work?
We have some stuff that's like a classics collection, stuff that's not in copyright, and that's that we didn't actually buy any licenses for. That is a part of the collection that we think people might be interested in.
Right, and there's a big section through the platform where we're housing these materials where the vendor puts a lot of material that's out of copyright, and then the collection the collection associated with Min Writes, Min Reads, none of that is under copyright. That keeps it out of that collection, so that wouldn't be an issue with that collection. You mentioned teachers, and it makes me want to jump on a little tangent about something that I love with these tools. Is I always talk about anthologies and how I think Min Writes, Min Reads offers a great home for anthologies. So I like to imagine a teacher with his class saying, here, everyone write about this topic, then the teacher compiles it into this anthology and puts it up there, and then it has a lasting home where people in the community can access that content. And that's exciting to me. So I imagine church groups doing similar work, or veterans groups, and then the community can access this history.
And also to piggyback on your excitement about the mention of schools and teachers, eBooks Minnesota now has a sibling called eBooks Minnesota for Schools, and it contains all the content that's appropriate for grade schoolers. And we all know that schools always need more resources, and school libraries and media centers always need more resources too. And eBooks Minnesota for Schools, you can be teaching a class to 40 kids, and you want to teach a book about Minnesota history, and lo and behold, there it is in eBooks Minnesota for Schools, and every kid can read it simultaneously. You don't have to buy 40 copies. You don't have to wait to check out 40 copies. They're all right there, provided by eBooks Minnesota for Schools, supported by the entire library community.
No due dates with those, so kids can linger with the materials.
So they just need a Kindle, or something,
right? Or a phone, or anything. It's all web accessible. A computer, a Kindle, a laptop.
Right. Well, are we getting? I mean, how far is this project from getting to the point where, say, a college instructor could resolve not to use anything that wasn't on it? I mean, just I'm not going to charge my students a cent for anything ever. Is that possible?
There's discussions happening about that kind of an effort with the Minnesota Libraries publishing partnership, and open educational resources is something that there are people at the University of Minnesota that they're really leaders in that field, both in finding and sort of pinpointing really high quality textbooks that can be used free of charge and are just as good as the thing that you'd have to buy off the shelf, both in those terms and in terms of encouraging people in the Minnesota academic community to create works on their own using the platform that we've been describing.
I see.
Yeah, more and more textbooks popping up on there, which is exciting. I'd say that's one of the heavier avenues of use even